Welcome to TBI. Okay, this is my colleague. I'm Marlene Drescher. This is Julie Manella. We're on the Tikkun Olam Committee at Temple Beth Israel. Tikkun Olam literally means repair the world. Julie is going to talk about that for a little bit.
So just by way of an introduction, this is a second in a series. We had, the first was October 24th here at TBI in the Tikkun Olam Committee, sponsored with ELA and the other organizations here tonight. At that time, we together generated these lists that you see posted around the room. You can see them. They're various whiteboards. There were over 200 participants, and we came up with these ideas of what you could do. And one of the main takeaways, I think, from that panel was that it all matters. The small individual things, the political activism, the legal challenges, it all matters. So here we are today, and we're going to continue the discussion.
So tonight is going to be a little bit different from our first in the climate series, because tonight we'll be talking about what we can do as a community, as a city, as a county, as neighborhoods, as citizens, as residents, what we can collectively do to influence and enact policy changes to slow global warming and climate change. With that in mind, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for joining in the conversation and taking this conversation to a new level of activism to combat global warming and climate change. And now, Patty Hine.
Here's your pen, Marlene. Hey, good evening, everybody. It's good to be here. Thank you, Marlene and Julie. It's great to be back in Temple Beth Israel, organizing for climate solutions. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the co-sponsors of this event. They helped plan it, our speakers, who you'll be hearing shortly, and panelists. They've agreed to take this very next important step with us, as I hope you have. It's taken a lot of people, their time and talents to create this opportunity. We hope you really enjoy it. My name is Patty Hine, and I will be your MC this evening. We've been hearing disturbing ecological predictions for many decades. The accelerating breakdown of the ecosystems that support us is matched by the accelerating number of dire scientific reports that document its destruction. If you are here tonight, you realize that the fight to avert the worst effects of industrial atmospheric pollution is our fight. And we're getting a late start. So what are we to do? We do what people in an emergency have always done. We organize for the common good. The common good is a stable climate. We're responsible for decarbonizing our community. We're starting here tonight. We're excited to see what we come up with, to plan some next steps together and organize like our lives dependent on it, because they do. Our guiding question for the evening is, what is the most important thing our community, including city government, can do to address climate breakdown? I'll repeat that. What is the most important thing our community, including city government, can do to address climate breakdown? We're excited to try this new thing in our second hour of the program for crowdsourcing and prioritizing our best ideas. It may seem chaotic at times. Stick with it. It's proven successful at gleaning the best ideas from large groups of people. We're going to have to learn to organize ourselves in new ways to get done the new things that need to happen. Thanks for being here and trying this tonight. To start off our first hour of speakers and panelists, it's my great pleasure to introduce Kitty Piercy, 3-time City of Eugene mayor, and my personal favorite climate hero in her own right. Kitty, welcome.
So I want to start, is this working? Oh, this. You'd think I'd know this by now. Anyway, I want to start out by saying thank you for being here. It does really matter that you're here. So thank you. Give yourselves a hand for just being here. And before I make some comments, I'd just like to explain this thing on the side of my face. I just want to assure you that I am distressed with our federal government, but I did not have a Van Gogh moment. Just so you know. I have a little basal cell thing here. So anyway, thank you for being here today, and welcome to everyone. Thanks to 350, Patty, Deb, all the folks who've been involved, and friends for this opportunity to have a discussion about our community's role in the reduction of emissions and the resilience to manage our present crisis. I'll just start out by pointing that significant thing out. You have to reduce, but we have to live. And we have to do both of those things at the same time. I think everyone here shares my belief that the climate crisis is no longer out in the future. It's here. You can't have felt the smoke in Eugene or seen the fires in California and Oregon. You can't have seen the floods. You can't see all the severe weather everywhere without knowing that it's no longer in the future. It's here. It's here right now. And everything we do, every thought we take, every action we make matters. It affects our economy, our natural resources, our quality of life. I'm speaking today from the perspective of having been both an activist and an elected official. I'm back to the activist stage now. Of course, I believe government's purpose is to do together what we cannot accomplish singly. Am I not spreading? Okay, all right, thank you. So I believe government belongs to all of us. When language is used that separates the government from the people, we lose power we have and are entitled to. I just want to say that again. When we allow the language to separate government from the people, we lose power we have and are entitled to. Government is only us. It's only us. What can a relatively small community do with this great challenge before us? I am convinced we must do whatever we can in many places and at many levels. We should never underestimate the human capacity to act, to innovate, to invent, to change. We must do this, and people are taking action all over the world right now. In fact, what did I see today? Greta, is that her name? From Sweden? I mean, she's gotten her government to put a big, huge chunk of money into climate work. I mean, you never underestimate what somebody can do. You can expect continuing reactionary forces. We live with a huge one at the federal level, as well as apathy to add to the challenge. But think of yourselves as one group of people connected to others all over the planet. There is power when you think of yourself not as an isolated group in Eugene, but a group of people who are connected to people all over the planet who deeply, deeply care and are acting on this. So I want you to feel the power. I suggest to you that you take the position that our government at all levels has a responsibility to keep us safe. That's true here at home, and climate is a huge safety and well-being issue. So this is not some nice theoretical thing. This is really about, will we survive? Will our children survive? Will there be a planet for us to? It couldn't be more important. So this is not a matter of whether government should do something. It's a matter of how much they can do and how fast. How much they can do and how fast. And it's really up to you because they are you. It's up to you. Never let anyone tell you our city is too small to do anything, to lead. No city is too small. Eugene joined Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle to form a coalition to work together on climate. We're among the big dogs. Eugene was invited to present at the second China-U.S. Climate Summit. We're among the bigger big dogs. We have the capacity to lead. When I was first mayor, I joined with a small group of 22 mayors to commit our city to the Kyoto policies. You remember the Kyoto policies? If our federal government refused to deal with climate change, we would do it at the city level. Hundreds of mayors then signed on, and each worked in their cities to reduce carbon emissions. Here in Eugene, we met the Kyoto policy emission reduction goals, but then of course we know that they are not sufficient. We did, however, raise the policy discussion for congressional and presidential discussion and action. And that's a really important thing, because up until that time, I really think that it was just sort of being pushed over to the side. I will share with you that one of the neat things that came out of that is I got invited to go to Sundance, where I hung out with Robert Redford. And we heard Al Gore give his inconvenient truth speech before it became public, where we heard the Gustow's talk about what's happening in the ocean, where we had the world's best climatologists all talking about these issues and empowering us with this passion for responsibility for what we needed to do as mayors in this world. What seems impossible can be done. I just want to tell you this. When I was a new mayor, I wanted to lead an effort to deal with climate and sustainability. At the city level, many folks felt we were a good environmental community already, so what's the deal? So I experienced a lot of passive opposition. But I'm a sort of a little red hen, and I just did it myself. So I got help from the university before I got it from the city, because I just wouldn't take no for an answer. So first of all, my lesson to you is be persistent and tenacious. Be persistent and tenacious. If somebody says no, then find the other way. I mean, just don't let anyone dissuade you from this really important work. And out of that effort, with bringing a broad group of the community together, I see Julie here, we did 22 recommendations to the city, and out of that came the city's first sustainability commission and our climate and energy plan. So, you know, I mean, I just want to say, people tell you no all the time, or tell you it's not, what you're doing is not adequate or not enough or not anything, but everything you do matters. I just think everything you do matters. And everything you do in connection with others makes for a bigger move. Opportunities will arise. Be ready to recognize them and take advantage, like our children's trust, right? I mean, those kids came to me and said, how can we get the city to do more? And I said, go and talk to them. And they did. And they came to count, and I said, don't come once, because they'll pat you on the head and tell you how nice it is. Come again and again and again, and be well prepared and reasonable, and just keep pushing. And they did. And then they came, they said, what should we do now? And I said, well, we know the community is really supportive. We've done survey work. So you should ask for something big. So they asked for our climate and energy ordinance, our climate and energy plan to be made into law. That's the first one in the nation. That is a hunkin' big deal. Of course, the bigger deal is to really keep working toward implementation. That is the bigger deal. There's a big gap between our aspirations and where we are. You need to be sure that when you're elected to change, and this is, I just want to say this is like long-term thinking. Every time a new person gets elected, you've got to be sure that piece of government reaffirms their commitment to climate change, or it can go drifting off somewhere. So right now, I couldn't tell you how affirmed our council is to it. That's for you to find out. But there is a way to go about getting that reaffirmation and getting the affirmation from the county, from the city, from LTD, from EWEB, from everybody. Those are things that, it's language, but it does make a difference because it gives direction to the people who work in all those places. The city needs to have dedicated staff with expertise. We started with that and we've lost some, so that's another issue. Climate action needs to be part of the budget discussions of the city, the county, LTD, EWEB, schools, state, all of them, all of them, all of them. The community needs to continue to request public information of the work done and how we're progressing. Perhaps some citizen oversight help or even improved use of the Sustainability Commission. It has to be clear that this work is for all of us, all of us, all of us. No step forward is too small. They are all linked. This includes electric vehicles, bike paths, transit, trains. It includes recycling. And I'm so and it includes, and I know Julie over here would be the first one to say it, use less. One of the things that's an example of doing the right thing in our community is those little fix-it shops where they tell people they can bring in their things and get them fixed and keep using them. That's a little thing, but it's an important, I can't even talk about how important that is. We just got to stop using as much as we use. It is step by step as well as big changes. We need them all to make a future. We have to talk about resilience and just tossing these things out for you guys. The protection and preservation of our water. We used to think we had unlimited water. We don't have unlimited water. The temperature and quality. Who's watching? The protection and preservation of healthy forests as conditions keep warming. Approving our actually faster implementation of our transportation plan that moves us forward. We have to move our city and everybody in it to clean energy. And natural gas is not clean energy. I don't think we'll all stop being meat eaters tomorrow, but we can all eat less. You know, I think you really have to wrap your head around this for how people feel and think. Because when you talk about this, you're not just talking about meat, you're talking about ice cream. I'm just saying. You're talking about yogurt. You're talking about all those things that are so central to your diet, and they all come via the same vehicle. So I just think you have to think about it in terms of how can I use less of all of these things or substitutes for those things, and many of you do, but it's those things will really make a difference. And I want to say we have to think about the most vulnerable among us. We should be planning now. The people who can't take care of themselves when things get tough, what are we as a community going to do? I think it's a really huge, huge issue. And I think equity is a huge issue. How will things affect people in different parts of our community, different income levels, different everything? We need to have some people who are grappling with those things. And I do not believe they are being grappled with right now. So you remember with Katrina when they didn't have any plan for the elderly? Do you remember that? They were all sort of abandoned. Well, I think we should get a few years out. I mean, it could happen tomorrow, but in any case, now is the time to be thinking about all these things and planning, not as, wouldn't that be nice, but what are we going to do as a community with the people who depend on us to survive? So I want you to really think about that. We must plan for refugees. I just want to tell you that it's not, I have many heart things about refugees, but the one thing I want to say is, you know, Australia is, people are barely able to live there right now because it's been so hot. They couldn't even go outside. I mean, not just a little hot, it practically burns you off the planet. India has cities where people cannot be outside for a great part of the year because it's too hot to live. This is not tomorrow. This is not 10 years from now. Oops, sorry, I gotta go. I see it. We must look ahead and plan. This year is a moment, this is my closer. This is a moment of opportunity. This is not a moment of desperation. This is a moment of opportunity. We have a nexus here. Our legislators support this work and should clearly make it part of theirs at the state and federal level. Our governor supports this work, and in the House at the federal level they support this work, you know, with the green thing. And so the moment is here to take advantage of all of that. Don't wait until it passes. Do something now to press and leverage and act for every part of our community. Your work today is important. It's very important. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Honorable former Mayor Kitty Piercy. There are a bunch of empty seats over here, so if you're standing at the edges of the room and would like to sit, please do come fill them in. It will be better for the speakers to not be talking to empty space in the first row. Thank you all for being here. I'm Rabbi Ruhi Sophia Motzkin Rubenstein of Temple Beth Israel, which means that I'm not a climate scientist or a policy expert or a politician. If I would presume to have expertise in anything, it's in the human condition. So I want to ask you, and those of you who have been to my Shabbat services are familiar with this question, what are you grateful for this moment? It's not rhetorical, you can call out the answer. Great. Okay, great answers. I'm going to ask you to get a little more concrete and anecdotal. Like, I'm grateful that my father brought me dinner this evening because I'm having a long day and wouldn't have had a dinner break. What else?
Organizers.
Planting peas. Great. What else? Just call it out. Good. We can and should keep going, but I do have limited time to speak. So you can just stay with that and tune me out if you feel like you have more to think about being grateful for. Because in this work, and by this work, I mean the practice of facing the crisis we're in without losing our minds, my teacher, Joanna Macy, tells us that we always need to ground ourselves in gratitude. Gratitude reminds us of what we love. It reminds us that even with so much lost, that there is still so much to fight for. And gratitude reminds us and gives us strength to feel the other emotions as well, the outrage, even the fear, and the joy. Because it is totally in our interest to be able to face the full spectrum of emotional responses that our climate crisis brings up, and it is entirely in the interests of the status quo and its purveyors to sink either into denial or despair. And by denial, I don't just mean being climate deniers, which I presume that no one in this room is. I mean the refusal to allow ourselves to really internalize what is happening, the refusal to face what this means for our world, or when imagining the world in 10 or 50 years or several generations, the refusal to imagine a world that is very different because of the effects of climate chaos. And by despair, I do not mean grief or anger or rage, all of which are vital for facing this work. I mean that form of resignation, that assumption that all of the outcomes are already in motion and it's too late to do anything, which means a kind of rejection of the possibility that our efforts might have any positive effect. That kind of resignation, of despair, is really another form of denial of responsibility. And the purveyors of the status quo want us to feel denial, despair, and guilt. They want us to feel paralyzed. They want us to feel like we are all part of the problem, and the only way to be good and blameless is to opt out of society as we know it and live off the grid in a do-no-harm survivalist mode. Conveniently, and there was like a letter to the editor of the Register Guard to that effect just a few weeks ago. Conveniently, that model focuses on isolated individual action and demands nothing of power structures and systems. It's also true that we're all part of the problem. But as a teacher in Jewish tradition, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught hundreds of years ago, if you believe you have the power to destroy, believe you have the power to fix. We who choose to navigate between denial and despair have certain responsibilities in this moment. We have a responsibility to be visionary rather than reactionary. As Naomi Klein has taught, it is not sustainable to base a movement on saying no to things. So when advocating for Eugene's climate recovery ordinance, we have a responsibility to cultivate a big picture vision of how we see this city evolving in sustainable, generative ways. Of course, we should make specific demands of the largest employers and industries in this city. And we should say no to things. But it should be in the context of a positive future we envision that can be better for all of us, rather than based solely in avoiding the most catastrophic of our fears. Thank you. We have a responsibility to be savvy. The surest way to burn out is to bang our heads against a wall when it is possible to find a key and open a door. And it really saddens me how often activists don't bother with the basics of power analysis, power mapping, and organizing, of figuring out who are the decision makers and who influences the decision makers. We can only demand of people what is in their power to fulfill, so we'd best be savvy enough to get our demands right and organized enough to back up and enforce our demands. We have a responsibility to hope, and I don't mean a facile optimism, which is too easily another form of denial. I mean looping back to gratitude. I mentioned at the beginning, we must be ready to notice what is not yet lost, even as we mourn that which is already irrevocably lost. We must be ready to celebrate victories, even though telling a story of catastrophe sometimes seems simpler and easier and maybe even more compelling. We must know that there will not be one identifiable moment when we win this. And we have to accept what it means to embrace that this work will mean to be in the fight indefinitely, even though this is an effort whose outcome will not be clear for decades or generations. As Rebecca Solnit wrote in her recent book, Hope in the Dark, the nuclear freeze activists were motivated by a storyline in which the world would be made safe for, among other things, going home from activism. The thing is, it will always be too early to go home. And in order to have the stamina to be in this long struggle, we must love the generations that come after us. Much is said about how our current treatment of the environment is theft from people of the future. For it to be sustainable, we must dedicate our activism to love of future humans. And that's not something I take for granted, because I know, and probably some of you feel the same way, that sometimes there's a certain cold comfort to thinking, well, maybe the world would just be better off if we weren't here, if we do all wipe ourselves out. So take a minute. This is going to feel corny and uncomfortable. Please lift your hand and hold it in front of your face, palm facing you. And consider this hand. Consider what a unique object you are beholding in the history of the universe. A lot of evolutionary trial and error went into the existence of this hand in front of your face. The extinction of humanity is no worthier a goal than the extinction of any other creature on this planet. And we have to believe in our redemptive capacity as highly evolved beings for us to have the stamina to do this work. Our task is to believe in ourselves as beloved children of earth, believe that we can have a place that is not one of destruction, and learn from those who are better at walking this path of being human on earth. Most human cultures that have existed have figured this out, have figured out how to walk earth without destroying it, and we can too. We're actually, endless growth capitalism is somewhat of a recent invention and anomaly. So we're not alone in this work, and all of the evolutions of humanity that led to us are on our side, and all of creation is rooting for us. So our task is to root for ourselves and mean it.
Thank you, Kitty Piercy and Rabbi Ruhi. It's delightful to be inspired by people who've been in the policy world and know how to get things done the hard way from the inside. It's wonderful to be inspired by people who understand the sacred and what we're facing and the power with which we can come together and face it with truth and beauty and courage. So I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to hear from them tonight. Our next speakers represent what we call impacted communities. We had 3 speakers teed up, one from Huerta de la Familia, Marisa Zarate, was sick, and so she's not able to be with us tonight, but we are very happy to have the representative from the NAACP, Pablo Alvarez, who will be bringing us a perspective about environmental justice. The other side of that, environmental racism. The biggest factor for citing an extractive, polluting industry is race and economic, capacity. So what we have is a very unequal situation where the most impacted and first impacted are those who have the lowest capacity for voicing any opposition to it. So we wanted to have their stories up front and center here. So Pablo Alvarez, are you here? I know you are somewhere. There he is. Let's welcome Pablo Alvarez. He'll introduce himself.
Hi, wonderful Eugene community. How are you doing tonight? You feeling good? Man, there's a lot of familiar faces here. Thank you for coming out today and supporting this event. I think everyone here agrees that the time to act was 40 to 50 years ago. So I can feel the sense of urgency in your faces. It's good. But I want everyone here, so please raise your hand if you are here tonight because you have a grievance that you want your city government and other members of your community to take seriously in regards to climate. All right, that's a lot of hands. How many of you believe that it is important and necessary for the unity of our community to listen to each other's grievances and lend credence to them wholeheartedly? All right. Well, thank you for saying so, because today I'm here to voice a couple of my own grievances and many grievances of the communities that I am representing. I want everyone to take a look to your left, to your right. Think about the faces that are missing. All right, there's a lot of them, right? And remember everything I'm going to say right now. It's not about you. It's about the person next to you. Right? Just think about that. So now I see a lot of faces here that were here 2 months ago also for another climate justice events that happened here in the same place. And I gave you homework that day. I don't know, those of you, can you raise your hand if you were here for that? Eli? All right, there's a lot of people, yeah. I gave you homework. I told you to please do everything in your capacity to reach out to those vulnerable communities that will be most affected by climate change and environmental degradation. Now, you don't have to say out loud if you did your homework. It's okay. That's between yourself and your conscience. But I think it's something that needs to be spoken of over and over again, and it's the grievance that I have, that low-income communities and communities with people of color for too long have been excluded from mainstream environmental activists. Not in my backyard, for the years has turned into place in minorities' backyard, and our communities can no longer take it. Due to historical inequalities, we do not have the capacity to organize in many of the same ways that many of you here do today. Remember, this does not mean we do not have the ability. It means we do not have the capacity. We are able. We are intelligent. We have solutions. We have dreams. We are resilient. We just need your help. We need your help to fight toxic polluters that are disproportionately placed in communities of color through bad zoning, land use, and permit rules. That is the first place that you can go. When you control for race, all studies show that race will be the first determinant to see where toxic polluting industry will be. We can't take it anymore. We need your help to ensure that our food doesn't become more expensive due to bad climate patterns. We need your help to fight the lack of investment in minority business enterprises, which cause minorities to have to drive more to go to work, which we all know causes pollution. We need your help for us to access dignified housing that can protect us from the effects of climate change, for those hotter summers and colder winters that we know climate change will bring. We need your help to ensure that our utility bills that are already disproportionately higher do not increase even more because of climate change. We need your help to prepare us for emergencies or catastrophic events, as we see that many governments, state governments, federal governments have not been adequate at responding to our needs. We can thank Katrina, we can thank Hurricane Maria over and over again. The government, it seems, that are incapable to responding to our needs when those needs come about. We need your help. We remember that this help does not mean that we need you to save us. We have our own solutions, and our solutions benefit us all. Just because it's solutions for communities of color does not mean that it's not solutions for you too. If we succeed, if we are good, you are too. We just need you to listen to us. We just need you to wholeheartedly come to the table and realize everything that I just told you right now. We need you to know that together we can fight, and we need you to recognize that you cannot have climate justice without racial justice. You cannot have climate justice without economic justice. And if we all join this fight, there's a lot that we can accomplish, but we need to start now. We needed to start 40 years ago or 50 years ago, but I see the sense of urgency in your faces, and I think that we can accomplish this. So again, look to your left, look to your right. 3 months from now, during Earth Week, I know many of you will also be at some other event. Let's try to put some faces in between those spaces that are next to you, right? All right. Thank you for having me today.
Hi. How's the sound? Is that a little better? All right. Pull up my talk here. My name is Tia Hatton. I'm one of the Juliana versus U.S. plaintiffs with Our Children's Trust. I'm 21 years old, and I'm here representing youth as being on the front lines of climate change. So, young people are on the front lines of climate change because we will be affected by and bear witness to the worst impacts of human-caused climate change. We will inherit an Earth that, much to our dismay, is at the very least committed to 1.5 degrees or Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit of warming, due to the nature of carbon dioxide sticking around in the atmosphere. In terms of the specific young people's impacts that I'll share today, I pull from my personal experiences, my fellow plaintiffs and friends, and also other stories that I've heard from them. I acknowledge that young people from currently marginalized communities are already be and will be impacted more than communities otherwise. To begin, young people are often more vulnerable to disease and health issues. Every time a wildfire hits and smoke fills the air, it threatens those with asthma. Wildfires are expected to increase with climate change warming. As warmer and wetter conditions move northward, so do the diseases that thrive in those climate conditions. Similarly, the allergy season will become prolonged, and it threatens those vulnerable youth. Health impacts also include the psychological impacts of considering the fate of our Earth, our special places in nature, and what the next year, decade, 50 years, 100 years looks like in terms of climate disaster. That's a really scary thought to me. It is not an easy burden to bear, as we are already bearing the weight of normal pressures of being a young person in today's society, and the massive fear that those with power aren't doing enough to protect our future. There are also young people who have already lost family members due to climate-related events, and those who experience post-traumatic stress from these disasters, all the while knowing that there is more of this to come and it's going to get worse. There will surely be an economic burden on these younger generations, our national debt, paying for more disaster relief at the same time that we pay for a long overdue and difficult transition off of fossil fuels. The list can go on, but in short, my generation and younger generations are going to live through the worst years of these climate-related impacts. And as my co-plaintiff Nathan said, my generation, without voting rights, has not been fairly represented in making decisions that will affect our lives, especially in the climate change debate. So what does our community need to do for younger people? I by no means have a complete list, and I invite other youth in the audience to speak up right now. But number one would be giving young people a place at the table, and if there's no place at the table or no table, make one. Educate young people about climate change. Every science and social science class, for that matter, should be mentioning climate change and its impacts. Teachers do a disservice to their students if they don't talk about it. Teach civics and teach them that not all laws are made for our own good and that sometimes civil disobedience is a positive. Teach, involve, and encourage young people to be involved in individual and community adaptation strategies. Back up our voices when we speak up. As we've been seeing recently, more and more young people are stepping up, and it's because we're scared and we're tired of adults and politicians making excuses on why today isn't the day to take action. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Sorry. Well, there are some reasons why we need to do something, right? Yes, thank you very much. It's really important to have the people who are going to be in the future here today, because we're using up their energy and resources like there's no tomorrow, and it's just got to change. So it's at this point in our program tonight that we're going to shift gears a little bit. This was a passive thing. We've been to these things before, haven't we? We come in, we hear fantastic people that we love, we hear their cry for help, they give us some good ideas, and we go somewhere afterwards. That's not what we're doing here tonight. What we're doing here tonight is trying something else. It's time for action, isn't it? What is it time for? Action. Right. Do we know exactly what to do? The solutions have already been presented. They are here for us. They've been here for decades. They're evolving even, and more solutions are available. What are we lacking? We're lacking political will. Can I hear that again? Political will. Exactly. So to Kitty's point, we are the ones who belong to, this earth, right? We belong to the earth. And we create these governments that we are part of, and they are us and we are them, right? So it's really for us to organize ourselves, but we've been pretty siloed, been pretty distracted. That's all going to change tonight. That's all going to change tonight. Tonight is really the first active step we've taken to changing from just passively trying to figure out what to do and we're trying to organize in the community. And we're so glad that every single one of you is here. So at this point in the program, we're going to have Matt McRae come up and tell us where we are. And that will give you the picture so crystal clear that at 7:30, we will get going on the activity that will organize us for the rest of the evening. Matt McRae, will you join me, please, at the lectern?
Is it possible to dim the lights a little? Would that be helpful in terms of seeing the slides? Yes. See if somebody who's got more talents than I do could take a stab at that. That would be great. Thank you. And I'm just going to get started. You don't need to read that. That's not important to the presentation. My name's Matt McRae, and I've been tasked with providing Climate Reality 101 in 15 minutes or less. So I'm going to go over a lot of detail, and you can criticize me for that, and that's okay. I'm also going to hang around afterwards, so if you have questions about some of the things that I bring up tonight, I'm happy to stay here and answer questions or provide you my card, and we can connect later to discuss further. So super briefly, my background, I have a bachelor's in natural resource management from Utah State University. I had the privilege of working for 8 years as the city's climate and energy analyst thank you. Thank you, former Mayor Kitty Piercy. Excuse me, I had the privilege of working on our climate action plan there. I now work for Our Children's Trust, where I'm supporting young people like Tia who are using the courts to seek change. I was also, I was blessed to grow up here in Oregon in the 1980s and able to visit the mountains and go down to Pringle Creek next to my home and watch the salmon run and not have to worry about climate change. It wasn't even a term in my head. That's not the same for the young people who are here today. And so I just like, for those of you in the room who are under 25, will you raise your hands? These people have the least amount of power. They have the greatest to lose and the greatest to gain from what we do tonight and going forward. So you all are why we're here, so we can use our voices to improve your future and our own. So in 30 seconds, I'm just going to tell you where I'm headed here. I'm going to very briefly discuss the community emissions, what the trend looks like. I'm going to talk about the sources of emissions very broadly, and then I'm going to address the very many ways in which we can reduce emissions, but again, fairly high level. I'm also going to share, and forgive me, I'm going to turn a little bit sideways here. I'm going to share a few starting places that to help just ground and remind us all where we are. I'm going to talk a lot about getting off of fossil fuels by 2050, because that is what the scientists tell us we need to do in order to get back to 350 parts per million in the atmosphere of CO2 and avoid the worst that climate change has to offer. It's critical tonight, and we've heard it already, that we focus on systems change. We all live surrounded by energy infrastructure and roads and buildings that narrow our personal options and shape how much energy we use. In 1956, our nation began making a huge investment in a national highway system. We now have the most amazing highways, But we didn't, at the same time, invest in a high-speed rail system. That infrastructure has a huge influence on your options. Similarly, here in Eugene, it's often much easier to get around by car than it is by other means, like bus or bike. The roads and transportation system are constraints on our personal options. Our work now is to change these systems, to make the low-carbon option possible, simple, and convenient. Yes, you take personal actions to reduce your personal footprint, and you should continue to do so. But we are all here today because clearly personal actions alone are not sufficient. Thank you to Rabbi Ruhi for just talking about how hard this is. This is hard work. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people around you. We'll all be working on this transition for years, for the rest of our lives, likely. Breathe and be kind to yourself. We know what needs to change. We have all the technology that we need to get ourselves off of fossil fuels by 2050. As a part of my work, I regularly read the research on decarbonization. So our task is not a technical one, it is a social one. Our work now is to inspire and influence, and in some cases, simply replace elected leaders who don't have fire in the belly. And lastly, I'm going to focus tonight on greenhouse gases, but I'm putting on my carbon goggles that prevent me from thinking about other challenges. But let us not deceive ourselves that the task before us is simply replacing one type of energy with another. In order to regain the planetary balance that is necessary, we will need to restore our relationship with this remarkable biosphere and the other humans we share it with. And now into the technical details fairly quickly. These are greenhouse gas emissions on the left-hand side, 2010. On the very right-hand side over here, 2050. So you can see just 7 years rather there of our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. This comes from the greenhouse gas inventory that was done by the city of Eugene. We're just talking about the emissions that come from our activities right in Eugene. We're not talking about imported emissions, things that people do on our behalf. I'll talk about that a little in just a moment. This is the target to get back to 350 parts per million. It is steep, make no question. It's hard. It is also unanimously adopted by our city council. Yeah, yes. Our city council, that is definitely worth applause. Our city council was the first to adopt a science-based target. Yeah. To get us back to a safe atmospheric concentration of CO2. It's a 7.6% annual reduction year on year. One other thing to point out here is that you can see that emissions in just the last year have dropped, but it's really this trend we need to look at, and if we extend a line, the emissions are actually fairly flat over the last several years. And in fact, when we look at projections of population increase in Eugene and our current emissions pattern, this is what business as usual looks like. The city of Eugene is in the process right now of updating our climate action plan. In doing so, they have met with a whole number of interested parties, including EWEB, Northwest Natural Gas, 4J, and many others. And they asked for commitments. What can we do to reduce our emissions? And when we add up all of their commitments, this is the level of reductions we get. There's a gap there, right? And if you have a sinking feeling like I did when I put this together, that's understandable. But it will get easier, I promise. There's some good news here. There it is. Good news. The good news is that we know how. As I mentioned, this is a social problem. It's not a technical one. We have huge advantages. In Eugene, we have a publicly owned utility. That means that the people that run the utility are elected by us, and they're responsible to us, right? If you live in Portland, you do not have that luxury. So we have a huge advantage in that way. We also have a room full of people who care deeply. So let's not forget that advantage that we have. And finally, we have a city council that has said repeatedly that this is a priority. So here's the breakdown of our emissions, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, each slice. Transportation emissions being the lion's share, as you can see. So as we think about how we're going to prioritize our work, that's probably got to be up there. Transportation comes from driving freight trucks and light-duty vehicles primarily just in town. That's the lion's share of those emissions. Commercial, residential, and industrial emissions are all in buildings where we're heating buildings, where we're cooling buildings, where we're running the lights in buildings. It also includes industrial processes like using natural gas in lumber mills and things like that. And then that last wedge of waste is largely from our landfill. Our waste that goes to the landfill, if there's organics in there, produces methane that is emitted, and it's a huge problem. So I'm going to just break these apart in just 3 pieces, and I'm just going to cover some of the very biggest tools that we have available to address these emissions. My point here is that this isn't a secret. We know what has to be done. We just have to get to work doing it. So some of the opportunities in the transportation sector, our city of Eugene has adopted a transportation system plan that has various aggressive goals. They have not yet completed the implementation plan, which will describe what happens first and how it's going to be paid for. At the current rate of spending, we will build out our bike and ped infrastructure in just over 30 years. From my perspective, that's too long. So we not only need more funding to do that, but we need political will to make that happen. Pricing of parking, it seems really odd, but when we look at the many tools, the policy tools that are available to a city government to influence our collective behavior, pricing parking is one of those that we haven't even touched. Expanding the use of electric vehicles, right? Again, not rocket science, they're available now. eWeb can be incentivizing us, they do already, they can do more further. And the city of Eugene can also be helping expand a charging infrastructure, right? To make it easier for people to use those vehicles. Straightforward. Expanding transit service. We have a really great transit system here. We need to use it, and we need to ask for it to be expanded further. In fact, there's a personal piece to all of these, right? When I say we need to expand electric vehicles, part of that is that if we have one up for, we're replacing a vehicle, we need to grab an electric vehicle if it can suit our needs. Expanding rail service is going to be critical, right? To reduce our demand for driving up to Portland or down to California, for example. We need to seek county involvement. Our county does not have a climate action plan. There's a huge opportunity here, and it's going to take pushing on our county to make that happen. But they also have a ton of levers available to them to help make this transition happen. That's a big one in my mind. And then the last one on the transportation side is maintaining a small urban footprint. We've done really pretty good about keeping the size, the footprint, geographic footprint of our community relatively small, and that makes it easier for us to get around in ways that don't rely on our car. We have to continue to do that. Moving over to the buildings side, some of the opportunities. Financing energy efficiency retrofits. This is super boring, right? I mean, this is not sexy. This is not solar panels. But we have to do this. We all have to insulate our homes and find ways to reduce the amount of overall energy that we're using. And when we do this, we need to start with low-income homes, and we need to start with rental properties, and we need to make sure that the people who are most likely to be negatively affected are not. We need to electrify natural gas in our buildings. Many of our buildings, about half of them, are heated with electricity and the other half with natural gas. There is currently not a supply of renewable natural gas that can meet that heating demand. We're going to have to electrify most of, if not all, of our buildings. This requires a change in thinking that many communities are not taking yet. We have a huge opportunity in the city of Eugene, and that the city of Eugene is currently discussing their franchise agreement with Northwest Natural Gas. I'm not going to go into the details, but there's an opportunity here over the next year to help make that happen at the city of Eugene level. And eWeb can also offer incentives, as they are already, continue to offer incentives for those of us that our natural gas furnace just died. What do we do now? We get electric. Continue to invest in renewable energy. We're very fortunate here. We have a really highly renewable energy grid locally, and we have to maintain that. Otherwise, we're transitioning onto electricity, and then it gets dirty, and we can't afford to do that. And finally, strengthening state building codes. We need to make sure that new buildings are as efficient as they can possibly be, and that they aren't built and designed to run on fossil fuels. That's a harder one because it's at the state level, but we can have some influence on that. And then the last wedge, looking at waste. How am I on time? Is anybody? I'm a little over, thank you. On the waste wedge, really the opportunity there is to reduce food waste, lumber, and other organics that are going to our landfill. We have opportunities to commercially compost those materials instead. We can push on the city to help make that program happen faster. Okay, so those are our territorial emissions. That's all what's happening locally, right? But we are aware that there are emissions associated with building the microphone that I'm speaking into and the screen that this is being projected on and everything that we use that's imported from out of our area. So we have to think about our consumption-related emissions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. But when we import goods from other places, we have to think about the energy that's involved. So we use less whenever we can. We buy durable and repairable goods. And then the big single thing that we do as individuals, and it was hit on already, is we try and cut down on meat and dairy. I like a burger as much as the next person, but I can eat fewer of them and be fine, right? So it doesn't mean we have to go completely vegetarian or vegan, though kudos to those who do, but drawing back on meat and dairy remarkably helps our emissions, and we can't forget our personal involvement there. Lastly, how do we prioritize? We work on actions that are lacking organized effort or advocacy. So as we think about where to plug in, think about those places where there's not already somebody working. We think about things that take a long time to decide on, to plan, or to build, or to replace. New buildings, for example. We can't afford to build energy-sucking new buildings. We need to focus on actions that save money, because there's a win-win there. And most importantly, actions that you care about, because you're going to have to work on these things for a year or 2 or 3 or maybe more. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.